Dame Goody, bless her practical heart, was the village's go-to for everything from a sniffle to a newborn squall. She's seen more bottoms than a park bench and could soothe a colicky babe with one hand tied behind her back, probably while stirring a poultice with the other. Her reputation was solid gold, built on common sense, capable hands, and a distinct lack of fuss. Little did she know, her very ordinary, very sensible life was about to take a sharp left turn into the land of you won't believe this tomfoolery. For now, it was just another Tuesday. The night in question began like any other. The crickets were serenading the moon, the village was tucked up tight, and Dame Goody herself was dreaming of, well, probably something sensible like well-stocked apothecary shelves. Not a hint of Pixie's magical horses or eye-opening ointments. Just the quiet, rhythmic breathing of a world blissfully unaware it was about to host a supernatural house call. Oh, the calm before the storm. Or in this case, the calm before the squinny-eyed, rather unsettling little old fellow. If only she knew, she might have double-bolted the door. Inside, the cottage was dim and sparsely furnished. A woman lay in a simple bed, looking pale and weary. A couple of small children, surprisingly normal-looking, were playing quietly on the floor. For a moment, Dame Goody thought perhaps she'd imagined the terrifying horse and the breakneck journey. Maybe the old fellow was just an eccentric with a fast steed. The ordinariness was almost more unsettling than outright magic at this point. It was like the calm in the eye of a very peculiar, squinny-eyed storm. She took a deep breath and put on her professional nurse face. The woman in bed's the good woman managed a weak smile. Beside her lay the baby, a fine bouncing boy indeed. Dame Goody, ever the professional, set down her bag and approached the bed. The children paused their play, eyeing her with a curiosity that seemed a little too knowing, perhaps, or was she just imagining things? The atmosphere was thick with unspoken things, a strangeness that clung to the simple room like cobwebs. Right then, Dame Goody thought, let's see to this little one. It was a baby after all, babies she understood. Dame Goody took the baby, her experienced hands automatically checking him over. He was, as advertised, a fine specimen. As she settled him, the mother spoke, her voice surprisingly clear despite her pallor. She gestured to a small, unassuming wooden box on the bedside table. The ointment, she said, for his eyes, stroke it on his eyelids as soon as they open. Dame Goody blinked. Ointment for a newborn's eyes, this was a new one on her. Usually it was just a bit of warm water and gentle cleaning, but when in Rome or a suspicious magical cottage. After a little while, the baby stirred and began to open his tiny eyes. And what eyes they were, squinny just like his father. Well, apples don't fall far from the tree, even if the tree is a bit peculiar and rides a horse with infernal headlights. Dame Goody, following instructions, dipped a finger into the ointment, a strange, faintly shimmering salve, and gently stroked it onto the baby's eyelids. The little one blinked, then settled contentedly. There now, she murmured, but her mind was worrying. What on earth was this stuff for? Her curiosity, that most dangerous and human of traits, got the better of her. She'd never seen such a treatment. What secrets did this ointment hold? Looking around, she saw the old fellow was tending to his wife, and the children were engrossed in some game involving, possibly, pulling each other's ears. No one was watching, just a tiny dab, she thought. What harm could it do? Famous last thoughts, of course. With a swift, furtive movement, she touched the ointment-coated finger to her own right eyelid. Oh, Dame Goody, you meddling marvel. Blink and the world tilted. No, not tilted, transformed. The dim, humble cottage vanished. In its place was a room of breathtaking elegance. Silks and velvets draped the walls, intricate carvings adorned the furniture, and soft, magical lights danced in the air like captured stars. The simple bed was now a grand, four-poster affair, and the woman lying in it, well, no longer pale and weary, but a radiant lady of ethereal beauty, dressed in shimmering white silk. Dame Goody's jaw, which had nearly dropped at the horse, now hit the floor with a metaphorical thud. And the baby, if he was fine before, he was exquisite now. His little face seemed to glow with an inner light, and his simple swaddling clothes were now a confection of silvery gauze that shimmered like moonlight on water. He looked less like a human baby and more like a tiny, perfect prince from a land of pure enchantment. Dame Goody stared, her right eye feasting on this impossible beauty, while her left eye presumably still saw the plainer version. It must have been quite the headache processing two realities at once, or maybe just one very, very big surprise. Then she looked at the other children. Oh, they'd changed too, but not quite in the same ethereally beautiful direction. The ordinary children were now revealed as flat-nosed imps with sharply pointed ears and mischievous, knowing grins. They were pulling faces, scratching their poles, which probably itched under those pointy ears, and generally living up to the imp job description. One was even cheekily tugging at the beautiful lady's silken bedclothes with long, hairy paws. Dame Goody suddenly had a very strong suspicion these weren't the neighbor's kids popping over for a playdate. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a revelation. Squinny-eyed fellow, magical horse, hidden cottage, transformative ointment, beautiful lady, impish children, pixies. She was in a house of pixies. Her sensible, orderly world had just been gate-crashed by the full, unadulterated fairy tale. For a moment, pure panic threatened. Then Dame Goody's lifetime of unflappable pragmatism kicked in. Right, she thought, pixies. Not in any of my nursing manuals, but one adapts. Best to keep stum and not let on she was seeing double, or rather, seeing true. So Dame Goody, bless her poker face, said nothing to nobody. She continued to mind the baby, cooing at the silvery-gauzed infant as if it were the most normal thing in the world, all while seeing the imps try to tie each other's pointed ears in knots out of the corner of her right eye. She changed the magical nappies, burped the radiant babe, and generally acted as if attending to the fey nobility was all in a night's work. It was perhaps the greatest acting performance of her career, and she didn't even get an award for it. Just a story. Then came the knock, not a polite tap-tap-tap, mind you, but a rather insistent, I mean business sort of rapping that could wake the dead or at least a very tired nurse at midnight. Dame Goody, startled from her sensible dreams, sat bolt upright. Midnight callers were rarely good news, usually a feverish child or an impending arrival. She sighed, already reaching for her shawl. Duty called, as it so often did, at the most inconvenient of hours. Little did she guess just how inconvenient and downright peculiar this particular call would turn out to be. Adventure, it seems, rarely consults one's schedule. She even managed to offer the beautiful lady a sip of water, which probably tasted like nectar to her enchanted senses, and tidied the silken sheets, all without betraying a hint of the astonishment churning within her. The squinny-eyed fellow, now looking rather dapper and less ugly in the magical light, watched her with an unreadable expression. Did he suspect? Dame Goody didn't dare guess. She just focused on the job, hoping her temporary immersion in the world of make-believe wouldn't have any lasting or glittery side effects. One could only hope. Soon enough, the beautiful lady declared herself well enough to mind her wondrous babe. The magical recovery was remarkably swift, no lingering coughs or need for bed rest in Pixieland, apparently. Dame Goody, with considerable relief, handed over the shimmering infant. Her job was done. Now, how to politely ask for a lift home from Fairyland without sounding like you were desperate to escape the enchantment. Thank you kindly, sir, she said to the old fellow. I believe your good lady is on the mend. Perhaps it's time I was heading back. Smooth, very smooth. The old fellow nodded, a glint in his squinny eyes. He reached into a pouch which probably held more than just loose change and produced a handful of coins. Gold coins. More gold than Dame Goody had seen in a year of Sundays, let alone for a single night's work. For your trouble, good dame, he said, his voice smoother than before. She accepted the payment with a polite curtsy, trying not to let her eyes, especially the right one, bulge too obviously at the sight of genuine fairy gold. Business, it turned out, was very good tonight. And so it was back to the coal-black horse with eyes of fire. Dame Goody, clutching her unexpectedly heavy purse, allowed herself to be whisked up again. The return journey was just as swift, perhaps even faster. This time, however, with her right eye privy to the magical undercurrents of the world, the blurred landscape held new fascinations. She saw faint trails of light, shimmering auras around certain trees, and fleeting glimpses of other, smaller, hidden things darting just out of full sight. The world was a much more populated place than she'd ever imagined, frightening but also rather wonderful. Before she knew it, they were back at her own familiar, non-magical cottage door. The transition from the enchanted realm to the mundane was abrupt, like waking from a vivid dream. The old fellow lifted her down as gently as if she were made of spun glass. He thanked her civilly enough, and with a final, enigmatic nod, he and the fiery-eyed horse were gone, vanishing into the pre-dawn gloom as if they were merely a figment of the night. Dame Goody stood there for a moment, the cold air on her face, wondering if it had all been a very elaborate cheese dream. Inside her cottage, everything was reassuringly normal. Her sensible herbs, her worn armchair, the faint smell of yesterday's stew. But the heavy purse of gold coins in her apron pocket was very real. And the lingering tingle in her right eyelid was also very real. She looked at her reflection in a polished pewter plate. Her right eye, did it look different, brighter perhaps? Or was that just the candlelight and an overactive imagination? One thing was for sure, sleep was going to be an interesting adventure tonight if it came at all. Pixies, honestly. The next day was market day. Normally, Dame Goody looked forward to the bustle, the gossip, and the chance to stock up. But today, the world felt layered. With her left eye, she saw the familiar stalls, the chattering villagers, the produce piled high. With her right eye, however, things were subtly different. Auras flickered around some people, wares on certain stalls seemed to hum with a faint energy, and the occasional stray sunbeam looked suspiciously like a pixie trying to trip someone. It was distracting, to say the least, trying to buy potatoes while half your vision was tuned to a magical frequency. She was trying to decide between the suspiciously cheap turnips and the reassuringly expensive carrots when she saw him. Her right eye spotted him first, naturally. The squinny-eyed old fellow from the night before, but he wasn't browsing. Oh no, he was flitting from stall to stall, light-fingered as a morning mist, pocketing an apple here, a string of sausages there, a fine lace handkerchief from under the nose of a snoozing merchant. And the most astonishing thing? No one else seemed to see him at all. He was completely invisible to the ordinary eye. Dame Goody watched, a mixture of indignation and a strange sort of fascination bubbling up. Her very good customer, the one who paid in fairy gold, was a common, or rather uncommonly magical thief. Her left eye saw nothing but shoppers milling about. Her right eye saw a one-man crime spree unfolding with impudent ease. She wasn't one to meddle usually. Live and let live, that was her motto. But this was happening right in front of her, seeing eye, and he had paid her very well. It seemed only polite to acknowledge him. So, taking a deep breath, she marched right up to where her right eye told her he was currently pilfering a particularly plump-looking pie. "Good'n, sir," she chirped, bobbing a little curtsy that was probably directed at thin air as far as anyone else was concerned. "I hopes as how your good lady and the little one are as well as—" She didn't even get to finish her pleasantries. The old fellow, who had been mid-pilfer, froze solid, pie halfway to his invisible pocket. He whirled around, or at least, his invisible form did. Grumbling good-naturedly about inconsiderate ailments, Dame Goody descended the creaky stairs, candle in hand. And there he was. The strange, squinny-eyed, little ugly old fellow wasn't an exaggeration. He was all sharp angles and shadows, with eyes that seemed to peer right through you, though you couldn't quite tell where they were looking. He looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts found in a troll's lost and found. Dame Goody, a woman not easily fazed, found herself slightly fazed. This wasn't her usual clientele, not by a long shot or a squinny-eyed squint. The funny old fellow, or rather the invisible funny old fellow, stared at her, his squinny eyes wide with utter astonishment. If he could have dropped the pie in shock, he would have. "What?" he exclaimed, his voice a startled whisper that only she could hear. "Do you see me today?" He looked her up and down, as if checking for hidden mirrors or some sort of magical detection device. The idea that a mere mortal could perceive him in his thieving disguise was clearly not on his agenda for the day. "Surprise, Mr. Pixie." "See you," replied Dame Goody with a cheerfulness that was perhaps a tad misplaced given she was addressing an invisible, light-fingered pixie. "Why, of course I do, as plain as the sun in the skies." Then, warming to her theme and perhaps enjoying his shock a little too much, she added, "And what's more, I see you are busy too, into the bargain." She gestured vaguely at the pilfered goods that only she could see him carrying. "Oh, Dame Goody, your knack for stating the obvious at the most magically inconvenient times was truly a gift." "Ah, you see too much," the old fellow muttered, his initial shock giving way to a sharp, assessing look. The jig, as they say, was up. His invisibility cloak, woven from pure pixie mischief, had been well and truly penetrated. He squinted his squinny eyes even further, if that were possible. "Now, pray," he asked, his voice low and suddenly devoid of any humor, "with which eye do you see all this?" It wasn't a casual question. There was an edge to it, a dangerous curiosity that made the hairs on Dame Goody's neck prickle slightly. But Dame Goody, bless her oblivious pride, was too chuffed with herself for having caught him out. The subtle warning signs went right over her sensible bonnet, with the right eye, to be sure, she declared, puffing up a little, pleased as Punch with her supernatural perception. She might have even tapped her right eyelid a bit, just to emphasize the point. If there was ever a moment to play dumb, to feign ignorance, to suddenly develop a mysterious case of seeing things that aren't there, this was it. Nope, not our Goody. The ointment, cried the old pixie thief, a sudden, terrible understanding dawning on his face. His voice was no longer a whisper but a harsh, angry rasp. Take that for meddling with what don't concern you. And before Dame Goody could so much as blink with either eye, he lunged forward and struck her sharply on her right eye. There was a flash of pain, a brief explosion of light, and then nothing. Darkness in her right eye. You shall see me no more, he snarled, and just like that, he was truly gone, even to her. And he was right, she couldn't see him anymore. Not with her right eye, not with her left. He had vanished completely, along with all his ill-gotten gains. But worse, much worse, was the chilling realization that the sight in her right eye was gone for good. From that hour till the day of her death, Dame Goody was blind on the right side. A permanent, rather painful souvenir from her brief foray into the world of pixies. A stark reminder that curiosity, while sometimes leading to gold, can also lead to a rather unfortunate poke in the eye. Moral of the story, mind your own business, especially if it's magical. The little fellow, without much preamble, explained his wife was ailing, the baby needed minding, and could she please come? Dame Goody hesitated. There was something decidedly off about him, like weak old fish trying to pass itself off as fresh. But then business was business, and a sick woman was a sick woman, pixie husband or not, though that thought hadn't quite formed yet. So, with a mental shrug and a reminder to herself that a paying customer was a paying customer, she agreed. Hop on your things, she muttered, more to herself than to him. What could possibly go wrong? No sooner had she popped on her things, her sturdy cloak and sensible bonnet, than the old fellow gestured to the door, and there it stood. A horse, yes, but not just any horse. This was a nightmare in the literal sense. Coal-black, with eyes that glowed like embers from the deepest smithy. It snorted impatiently, pawing the ground, clearly not your average nag. Dame Goody's jaw nearly dropped. We're riding that? She might have thought her sensible nurse's brain doing a frantic calculation of risk versus reward. The reward better be good. Before she could voice a sensible objection, like, are you quite sure this beast is road-worthy? The old fellow had whisked her up. One moment she was on solid ground, the next she was perched precariously behind him on the enormous, fiery-eyed steed. Hold on tight, he cackled, a sound like dry leaves skittering over cobblestones. Dame Goody, abandoning all pretense of dignity, clung on like grim death itself. Her bonnet was probably askew, her nursing bag banging against her hip, but staying on that horse was priority number 1, 2, and 3. And then they were off. Rare pace was an understatement. The wind shrieked past, blurring the familiar cottages and trees into streaks of color. Dame Goody squeezed her eyes shut for a good part of it, convinced each hoofbeat was taking them further from sanity and closer to, well, somewhere very strange indeed. The horse moved with an unnatural speed and smoothness, less like galloping and more like flying low over the ground. If she dared to peek, she might have seen the landscape warp and twist in ways that defied good old-fashioned geography. Best not to look, really. They rode through tangled woods that seemed to close in behind them, over hills that weren't on any map Dame Goody knew, and across streams that shimmered with an odd, silvery light. The air grew colder, or perhaps just different. It smelled of damp earth, unknown blossoms, and a faint hint of something metallic and wild. Dame Goody, despite her fear, couldn't help but feel a thrill of the utterly unknown. This was certainly a step up from delivering Mrs. Higgins's twins, bless her cotton socks. The world was decidedly larger and weirder than she'd previously suspected. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of clinging on for dear life, the demonic Uber service slowed. They stopped before a cottage door. It looked surprisingly ordinary. A bit dilapidated perhaps, nestled in a clearing that seemed to appear out of nowhere, but a cottage nonetheless. Dame Goody, legs feeling like overcooked noodles, practically fell off the horse when the old fellow dismounted. Well, here we are, he grunted, as if they'd just popped down the road for a cup of sugar. Dame Goody just nodded, trying to catch her breath and her wits.